Greetings everyone, Pascal here with a roundup of the newest shader updates. I've been working hard to make my shaders play nice with upscalers like DLSS, FSR and friends, because as long as you don't use them, everything is great. Turn on DLSS though and, well, let's just say the shaders throw a fit. But fear not, I've added a shiny new compatibility mode to save the day. Just slap a preprocessor definition called Marty's Mod's TAAU scale into your setup, specify the mode you're rocking, like DLSS quality for me here, recompile and voila! No more visual chaos. Your output will be stable, clean and sharp-ish. Sure, it might be a bit fuzzy in motion, because temporal upscalers love the blur and noise, but trust me, in practice you will barely notice. Problem solved and your frames will thank you. Next on the list we've got a fresh shader to tackle a classic issue. Most games lean on eye adaptation to juggle wildly different scenes. For example, this one changes brightness once I enter a new cell. It's a bit prehistoric, but even new games aren't exactly cutting edge here. They usually normalize brightness by averaging it across the entire image. Let's kick things off by trying to balance the scene with a uniform exposure offset. This way we can really appreciate the glorious ray traced reflections on the horse piss in the foreground, or whatever. Crank up the brightness enough so the shadowy areas look nice and boom, everything else turns into an overexposed mess. With our exposure dialed in for the shadowy spots, it's time to bring in the big guns. My new shader, Exposure Fusion. It's set to optimize colors to be, well exposed. Watch closely. As I crank up the intensity, the dark areas gracefully brighten while the highlights stay cool and collected. No more blinding blows like before, just smooth, balanced colors everywhere. One game crash later, and we're back at it. Flipping the shader on and off, I think it's pretty obvious what it's doing. But hey, let's take a stroll around the scene so you can see it flex in motion and handle different lighting setups. Notice how the shadows get a nice lift, but nothing goes full supernova on the highlights. As we turn right into this dark alleyway with the guy that wants our shaders for free, you can really tell how it brings up the average brightness to meet the desired exposure target and greatly improves visibility. As we step out of the alley, watch how the bright buildings in the background gently dim. It's subtle and refined, far less jarring than regular auto exposure. Speaking of supernovas, let's dive into Convolution Bloom. First off, I squashed a long-standing bug that would break it in DirectX 12. You're welcome. Next, I upgraded the downsampling filter so it's way more stable during motion and gave the diffraction spike preset a serious glow up with new features. Blur now spreads the spikes in a way that matches diffraction patterns from apertures that are somewhere between round and polygonal. Isn't that fancy? There is also a new slider called Spread that breaks up the pattern and adds alternate spikes, replicating what you would see with an imperfectly round aperture, like say the iris of your own eye. Oh, and you can now tweak the aspect ratio of the bloom to mimic the look of anamorphic lenses, because why settle for boring when you can be cinematic? On the add-on front, I gave ReGrade Plus a solid spring cleaning. First up, I added a vector scope to the GUI, which works exactly the same way as in DaVinci Resolve. Next, I swapped out the old LabNB offset for a proper tint slider that works exactly orthogonally to temperature. Speaking of sliders, they got a serious upgrade too. They are now drag slider hybrids. Using them is now less of a drag, if you want. So you can move them here or move them here, and if you hold the left Alt key, you can move much slower than you would normally be able to. Also, right click now resets them, so no more context menu bullshit. There is also a global reset button at the bottom now that resets everything, every slider, every curve to the defaults, as well as the widget at the very top. And finally, saving the best for last, RTGI. I've cooked up a brand new lighting formulation that tackles a classic issue: overexposure from overly bright objects practically setting themselves on fire with their own light. For comparison, here's the game in its natural untouched state, here's the old blending mode doing its thing, meh, and now bask in the glory of the new mode, smooth, balanced and retina conserving. Specular reflections also became a lot more motion stable now, here's the old one and here are the new ones. And here is another scene for the new RTGI release. Since some of you wanted a peek behind the curtain, here's a bit about the development process. To optimize the RTGI denoiser, I compared the filtered output against an unfiltered ground truth rendered with maximum settings. My denoiser tries to keep the amount of blur to a minimum, as killing all detail is very easy and keeps triggering low, but I want to retain as much of the detail I, or rather my GPU, battled hard to get. The new DLSS compatibility mode could help for those of you who want to prioritize smoothness over detail though. Speaking of which, here's me reverse engineering Witcher 3's DLSS frame jitter. I've tried to see if there was a pattern to them that could be exploited, but there was not. On the new albedo estimation for RTGI, here's an early side-by-side. The original game, the old blending mode with blown out candle spots, and finally the new blending mode, stronger but far more kinder to colors. Here's the original game and the new blending mode again. I want to close this post with a heartfelt thank you for your continued support. This past year has been incredibly tough for me after losing the most important person in my life. Being able to take the time to heal without the weight of financial worries is an immense privilege, one I know I haven't acknowledged enough. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. For the year ahead, my resolution is to bring you more frequent updates, stay much more connected, and finally tackle those long promised presets. That's all for now, take care and happy holidays.